I still remember the day like it was yesterday, though the years have softened its edges. The sky was a somber gray, as if the heavens themselves were mourning alongside us. I stood at the entrance of the funeral home, my heart heavy with grief, my fingers nervously adjusting my tie. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, the quiet murmurs of condolences washing over me like a gentle tide. This was the day we were saying goodbye to Michael, my childhood best friend, the one who knew all my secrets, who had been there through every significant moment of my life until now. And now, I had to face a world without him. The funeral home was adorned with white lilies and photographs of Michael's smiling face. His infectious laughter seemed to echo through the room, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that hung in the air. I made my way to one of the pews, my legs feeling like they might give way at any moment. The weight of loss pressed down on my shoulders, making each step forward a conscious effort. I hadn't slept properly in days, and the reality of Michael's absence was still something my mind refused to fully accept. As I settled into my seat, I noticed the pew was mostly empty. It was still early, and only a handful of mourners had arrived. I stared ahead at the mahogany casket, adorned with a spray of white roses, Michael's favorite. My mind wandered to our last conversation, just 3 weeks ago, when he had called to tell me about his new job opportunity. He had been so full of life, so excited about the future. How cruel fate could be, taking him away in a senseless car accident just days later. I was so lost in my thoughts that I barely noticed when someone sat down beside me. It wasn't until I felt the slight shift of the wooden bench that I turned to look. And that's when I saw him, a man about my age, perhaps in his early 30s, with kind eyes that carried their own weight of sorrow. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement, and I returned the gesture, wondering if he was a colleague of Michael's that I hadn't met before. The funeral home gradually filled with people, a testament to how many lives Michael had touched. The soft sobs and whispered conversations created a somber symphony around us. I recognized many faces, Michael's parents, hunched with grief, his sister, trying to stay strong for her children, colleagues from work, friends from college. Each person carried their own memories of Michael, their own private grief. Let me explain why this moment matters so much in my story. In times of profound loss, we often find ourselves hyper-aware of our surroundings, as if our senses are trying to anchor us to reality when our emotions threaten to sweep us away. I remember noticing the scent of the man's cologne beside me, subtle, with notes of sandalwood and something citrusy. I remember the way he sat, straight-backed yet somehow not rigid, as if he was familiar with the formal setting of funerals but not comfortable with them. No one ever truly becomes comfortable with death, do they? The service began, and Michael's father stood to deliver the eulogy. His voice cracked as he spoke of his son's kindness, his ambition, his zest for life. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, threatening to spill over. I had managed to keep my composure until now, but hearing Michael described so vividly, remembering all the qualities that made him who he was, it was too much. A tear escaped, then another, and soon they were flowing freely down my cheeks. I fumbled in my pocket for a tissue, but came up empty. And that's when it happened, a simple gesture that would change everything. The man beside me silently offered a handkerchief, a real cloth one, the kind few people carry anymore. Our eyes met briefly as I accepted it, and I saw no judgment there, only understanding. His hand brushed against mine in the exchange, and something about that brief touch felt like an anchor in a storm. The eulogy continued, followed by other speakers, Michael's sister sharing childhood memories, his best friend from college recounting their adventures. Each story painted a picture of a life well lived but cut tragically short. The man beside me listened intently to each speaker, occasionally nodding as if he too had witnessed these moments or could relate to them deeply. I couldn't help but wonder about his connection to Michael. Was he a friend I hadn't met? A relative from out of town? I had known Michael for over 20 years, had been privy to most aspects of his life, yet this man was unfamiliar to me. There was something about him, though, that felt strangely comforting, as if his presence beside me was exactly what I needed in that moment. As the service progressed, I found myself increasingly aware of him. The way he would occasionally brush away a tear of his own. The gentle rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. The way his hands rested in his lap, fingers occasionally fidgeting with his own wedding ring, turning it. A nervous habit, perhaps. These observations provided a welcome distraction from the overwhelming grief that threatened to consume me. When the final hymn began, everyone stood. In the shuffle to rise, our shoulders touched briefly. He gave me an apologetic smile, and I returned it, the first smile that had crossed my face in days. Something shifted in that moment. In the midst of saying goodbye to one of the most important people in my life, I felt a connection forming with this stranger. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was too soon, too raw for that. But it was a connection nonetheless, a thin thread of understanding spun between two souls in mourning. As we sang, our voices joining with others in a melody that seemed to rise toward the heavens, I felt his hand brush against mine. It could have been accidental, the natural consequence of standing shoulder to shoulder in a crowded pew. But then his pinky finger hooked around mine, just slightly, just enough to let me know it was intentional. A small gesture of solidarity, of shared grief, of human connection when I needed it most. You might wonder why such a small touch could mean so much. Here's the thing about grief. It isolates you. Even in a room full of people who love the same person you did, grief feels deeply personal, a burden you carry alone. That small point of contact, that deliberate reaching out, was like a whispered message. I see your pain. You're not alone in this. The hymn ended, and we sat down again. This time, we sat closer than before, our shoulders occasionally touching. Neither of us acknowledged it verbally, but there was a silent understanding between us. As the service continued, I found myself drawing strength from his presence, from the occasional glances we shared, from the way he seemed to intuitively know when the grief was becoming too much for me to bear. When it came time for the final viewing, we stood together and joined the line of mourners making their way to the casket. The line moved slowly, each person taking a moment to say their personal goodbyes. As we inched closer to the front, I felt my anxiety rising. I wasn't sure I could bear to see Michael like that, still and silent, so unlike the vibrant friend I had known. The man beside me must have sensed my distress because he did something that still moves me when I think about it today. He reached for my hand, taking it fully in his. His palm was warm against mine, slightly calloused but gentle. He didn't say anything. What words could possibly help in that moment? But his hand spoke volumes. It said, I'm here. We'll do this together. You have the strength for this. And somehow, with his hand in mine, I did find the strength. When we reached the casket, I looked down at Michael's peaceful face and was able to whisper my goodbye without breaking down completely. The man beside me had his own moment with Michael, bowing his head briefly in what appeared to be a silent prayer. I noticed a tear slip down his cheek, and without thinking, I squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, and in that exchange was a world of understanding. As we moved away from the casket, he didn't let go of my hand immediately. We walked back to our seats, still connected. Only when we needed to navigate the narrow space between the pews did our hands reluctantly part. But something had changed. A barrier had been crossed, a connection established that transcended the usual formalities between strangers. During the remainder of the service, memories of Michael flooded my mind. I remembered our college days, staying up all night studying for exams, then celebrating with cheap pizza and cheaper beer. I remembered the time he convinced me to go skydiving, how terrified I'd been, and how exhilarated I'd felt afterward. I remembered how he'd been there for me when my father passed away, showing up at my door with no words, just open arms and a shoulder to cry on. These memories brought fresh waves of grief, but also a profound gratitude for having known Michael. And somehow, sitting beside this stranger who no longer felt like a stranger, I found myself thinking about the nature of connections between people. How some relationships span decades, rich with shared history, while others can form in an instant, born from a moment of genuine human understanding. When the service ended, people began to file out, many heading to the cemetery for the burial, others to the reception that would follow. The man beside me turned to me fully for the first time. I'm David, he said simply, his voice deep and gentle. James, I replied, offering my hand formally this time, though it felt almost redundant after the intimacy we'd already shared. You were close to Michael, he asked, though it sounded more like a confirmation than a question. Since we were kids, I nodded. He was my best friend. And you? We worked together at the foundation, David explained. Only for about a year, but Michael had a way of making fast friends. He talked about you often, actually. This surprised me. He did. David smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes despite the sadness there. All the time. My friend James would love this, or James and I once did something similar. I feel like I know you already. There was something comforting about knowing Michael had shared our friendship with others, that our bond had been important enough for him to mention regularly. And there was something intriguing about this man who had formed his own connection with Michael, who had heard stories about me before we'd ever met. Are you heading to the cemetery? David asked. I nodded. And then the reception after. Michael's parents invited everyone back to their house. Would you mind if I drove with you? He asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. I came straight from the airport and took a taxi here. I was going to call another one, but... Of course, I said without hesitation. I'd appreciate the company, actually. As we walked to my car, I realized I was grateful for his request. The thought of driving alone to the cemetery, sitting alone at the graveside service, had been weighing on me. Michael had been my buffer in social situations, the extrovert to my introvert. Without him, I'd been dreading navigating the crowd of mourners, many of whom I knew only through him. The drive to the cemetery was quiet at first, but not uncomfortably so. Then David broke the silence. Tell me something about Michael that I wouldn't know from work. A childhood memory, maybe. And just like that, the floodgates opened. I told him about the tree house we built when we were 12, how Michael had fallen and broken his arm, but insisted on finishing it anyway, his arm in a cast. I told him about our prom night, when both our dates abandoned us and we ended up at an all-night diner, laughing until our sides hurt. With each story, the pain of loss remained, but alongside it grew a sense of joy in the sharing and keeping Michael's memory alive. David listened intently, laughing at the funny parts, asking questions that showed he was truly engaged. Then he shared his own stories of Michael, the office pranks, the passionate speeches about the Foundation's mission, the time Michael had stayed late to help David finish a crucial proposal when everyone else had gone home. By the time we arrived at the cemetery, something had shifted between us. We were no longer strangers brought together by circumstance, but two people connected through our shared love for someone who had meant the world to both of us. The graveside service was brief but poignant. Standing under a gray sky that threatened rain, we watched as Michael's casket was lowered into the earth. David stood beside me, our shoulders touching, a silent pillar of support. When I felt myself starting to crumble as the first handful of dirt hit the casket, his hand found mine again, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that belied our short acquaintance. Afterward, at the reception, David stayed close. He seemed to intuitively understand when I needed a buffer from well-meaning but overwhelming condolences, stepping in with introductions or taking over conversations when words failed me. And he knew when to step back, allowing me private moments with people who had been part of Michael's life and mine for years. As the afternoon wore on, the crowd began to thin. Michael's mother found me in a quiet corner, David respectfully giving us space but remaining nearby. She hugged me tightly, this woman who had been like a second mother to me growing up. Michael loved you so much, James, she said, her eyes red but dry, as if she had no tears left to shed. You were the brother he always wanted. I loved him too, I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to do this without him. She cupped my cheek in her hand, a gesture so maternal it nearly undid me. One day at a time, dear. That's all any of us can do. Then her gaze shifted to David, who was speaking quietly with Michael's father across the room. I see you've met David. I nodded. At the service. He worked with Michael. She smiled, a small but genuine smile. Michael thought you two would get along. He mentioned wanting to introduce you several times. Her eyes held a knowing look that I couldn't quite interpret. I'm glad you found each other today, even if it wasn't how Michael planned it. Before I could ask what she meant, she was called away by another relative. I was left pondering her words, watching David across the room. Had Michael intended to introduce us? Why? What had he seen in both of us that made him think we would connect? As the reception continued to wind down, David approached me again. I should probably call that taxi, he said, though he made no move to take out his phone. Where are you staying? I asked. The Marriott downtown. Just for tonight. My flight back is tomorrow afternoon. I hesitated for just a moment before offering, I can drive you. And if you don't have plans for dinner. The invitation hung in the air, unfinished but clear. David's expression softened. I like that. Very much. We said our goodbyes to Michael's family, promising to stay in touch, to not let our connections fade just because the person who had brought us together was gone. In the car, a comfortable silence settled between us. It had been an emotionally exhausting day, and I think we both appreciated the quiet. When we reached the hotel, I expected to drop him off, perhaps make plans to meet later for dinner. But as I pulled up to the entrance, David turned to me with an unexpected vulnerability in his eyes. Would you mind coming up for a bit? I don't think I can be alone right now. We could order room service instead of going out, if you're tired. The request was so honest, so free of pretense, that I found myself nodding before I'd even fully processed it. I don't think I can be alone right now either, I admitted. In his hotel room, we both loosened our ties and shed our suit jackets, physical symbols of the formality of the day dropping away. We ordered food that neither of us was particularly hungry for, and opened the minibar, pouring whiskey into hotel glasses. To Michael, David said, raising his glass. To Michael, I echoed, the burn of the whiskey a welcome sensation after a day of numbness. We talked for hours, moving from memories of Michael to our own lives. I learned that David was an environmental lawyer, passionate about the same causes that had driven Michael's work at the foundation. He had grown up in Seattle but moved to Boston for law school and stayed. He had been married briefly in his 20s, a relationship that had ended amicably when they both realized they wanted different things. I shared my own story, my work as an architect, my love for the city where Michael and I had grown up, my series of relationships that had never quite felt right. As we talked, the grief remained, a presence in the room with us, but alongside it grew something else, a connection, a understanding, a sense of possibility. It was well past midnight when our conversation finally began to wind down. I knew I should leave, drive home, try to get some sleep before facing another day without Michael. But something kept me there, perched on the edge of the hotel bed, my empty whiskey glass in hand. David seemed to sense my reluctance to leave. It's late, he said softly, and you've had a few drinks. You could stay, if you want. Just to sleep, he added quickly. The couch pulls out, or I can take it if you prefer the bed. The offer was practical, logical even, but we both knew it was more than that. It was an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed between us, a desire not to break it just yet. I'll take the couch, I said, making my decision. But later, as I lay on the pull-out bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkened room, I heard David's voice from the bed. James? Are you awake? Yeah, I replied. A pause, then, I keep thinking about what Michael would say if he could see us now. I smiled into the darkness. He'd probably say, I told you so about something, knowing him. David's soft laugh was warm in the quiet room. Probably. He was always trying to play matchmaker. Said I worked too much, needed someone to remind me to live a little. My heart beat a little faster at the implication. He used to tell me I was too cautious, that I needed someone who would challenge me to take risks. Another pause, longer this time. Then I heard the rustle of bedsheets as David sat up. Do you think? Is this too strange? Meeting like this, feeling, whatever this is. I sat up too, able to make out his silhouette in the dim light filtering through the curtains. Maybe it should be strange, I admitted. But it doesn't feel strange. It feels right, he finished for me. Despite everything, despite the grief, it feels right. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he could see me clearly. Michael would approve, I think. He always did have a knack for bringing the right people together. Come here, David said softly, patting the edge of the bed. Just to talk, he added. I want to see your face for this conversation. I moved to sit beside him, the mattress dipping slightly under our combined weight. In the dim light, his features were softened, but his eyes were intent on mine. I live in Boston, he said, stating the obvious but necessary fact. You're here. I am, I acknowledged. But Boston's not that far. And I work remotely half the time anyway. A smile tugged at his lips. Are we really discussing logistics right now? At a time like this? I couldn't help but smile too. I guess we are. Too practical for our own good, maybe. Or maybe, he suggested, his voice dropping lower. We both know that whatever this is, it's worth figuring out the logistics for. His hand found mine on the bedspread, our fingers intertwining now with a familiarity that belied our short acquaintance. This touch, like the one in the church, spoke volumes. It spoke of comfort and grief, yes, but also of possibility, of a future neither of us had anticipated when we woke up that morning. I'd like to see you again, I said simply. After you go back to Boston, I'd like to get to know you without Olive. I gestured vaguely, encompassing the day, the grief, the unusual circumstances of our meeting. David's thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand, a gesture so intimate it made my breath catch. I'd like that too. Very much. We sat there for a long time, talking softly in the darkness, our hands joined, occasionally leaning closer, shoulders touching, then pulling back, both of us aware of the delicate balance we were maintaining. There was an attraction there, undeniable and unexpected, but also a respect for the gravity of the day, for the grief that still enveloped us both. When I finally returned to the couch to sleep, it was with a sense of peace I hadn't expected to find that day. The loss of Michael was still a raw wound, one that would take time to heal. But alongside that pain was a new feeling, a tender shoot of hope pushing through the soil of grief. In the morning, we exchanged numbers and a promise to call soon. Our goodbye was a hug that lingered, neither of us quite ready to let go, both of us understanding that this was just the beginning. 3 days later, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a smile spread across my face as I answered. I was thinking, his voice came through, warm and already familiar. I have some vacation time saved up, and I've never really explored your city properly. Is that right? I replied, unable to keep the happiness from my voice. Well, you're in luck. I happen to know a pretty good tour guide. And so it began, this unexpected journey. Born from grief, but blossoming into something beautiful. Sometimes I think about that day at the funeral, about how the simple touch of a hand said what words couldn't. How in our darkest moments, human connection can be a lifeline, pulling us back toward the light. Michael is still missed, every day. But I like to think he's somewhere, watching us with that knowing smile of his, pleased that even in leaving, he managed to bring together two people who might never have found each other otherwise. His final gift to us both. Total _char_count, 18,887.